Hello, I'm Mike Parrish, Agriculture Extension Agent in Dinwiddie County, and I'm for the soil because it's the foundation to everything in agriculture.
Hey everybody, we're going to be getting to the podcast in just a moment, but first of all, I wanted to take just a moment, if I may, to remind you that we now have more than 2 years of podcasts in our archive. They're all found at our website, forthesoil.org. That is the digit 4, thesoil.org. So if you're looking for resources, we got them at forthesoil.org. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome to another episode of For the Soil Conversation. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee, and joining me, my co-host, Dr. Eric Bendfeldt, Virginia Cooperative Extension Community Viability, and Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Today, we're going to be talking about soil biology and tools to measure soil health. Dr. Bendfeldt, if you would introduce our guest, sir.
Yes, Jeff, we're pleased to have with us Dr. Stuart Grandy of the University of New Hampshire. Dr. Grandy's a professor of natural resources and the environment there, and recently gave a guest lecture at Virginia Tech that was sponsored by the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. And we're very pleased to have Dr. Grandy with us. And Stuart, if you could tell us maybe about your earliest inspirations around soil science and any additional background that you'd like to share.
Great, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation to join you today. I became interested in soil science when I was in college. I was working on farms and had the opportunity to travel around the country and work on a lot of different farms, and saw some of the challenges that farmers were facing with respect to managing the health of their soils and maintaining yields and doing all this in a way that was economical. And I realized then, as I was working in the soil and had my hands in it often every day, that there were so many things that we didn't know. And for a while, I thought I might want to be a farmer. And then I realized my contribution really should be as a scientist. And I had a lot of questions and really wanted to contribute to discovery in soils and to help farmers better understand what's happening below ground in a way that they can take that information and think about their soils and their cropping systems in new ways.
And Stuart, I know a lot of your research and work, it looks at the diversity of soil life. And I guess just could you, in short, I know we could spend the whole podcast talking about this. What are we talking about when we say soil life, life of the soil?
The soil is a home to a staggering array of different kinds of organisms. We can start with the food web, and the food web consists of the critters that we can see, the earthworms and the beetles. Some nematodes are visible. There's also an incredible diversity and number of bacteria and fungi and archaea in soils. And so when we talk about soil life, we're talking about all of those organisms and their interactions. And now we have the tools available to begin to probe the life of the soil in a way that we were never able to before. And I think we are really right on the cusp of being able to understand how the life in the soil is related to functions that growers care about, like the accumulation of soil organic matter, like nutrient cycling, like disease suppression, in a way that was never possible in the past.
And so, Stuart, we've been focusing on 4 soil health principles, but if you could, one of those principles is minimizing soil disturbance. When we think about soil biology and soil life, why is that so critical?
One really important consideration is that the fungal hyphae are maintained in the soil when we're not constantly tilling it. And tillage breaks up fungal hyphae, and that disrupts aggregates and disrupts the microsites in which the microorganisms live. Of course, we know that different soils respond differently to tillage, but most soils are going to respond positively to reducing disturbance and reducing tillage intensity. It helps to reestablish some of the stratification of nutrients and organic matter going from the surface to depth that we see in a natural soil. It maintains the habitat that the microbes live in. It maintains the pore space structures and the channels for water flow. All of these things benefit the life in the soil.
Dr. Grandy, I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about the soil types you find there in New England. I'm very interested in the difference between that and where we're located in the Mid-Atlantic region, specifically in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Here in Virginia, we have everything from mountain ranges all the way to the beach with pure sand, and then literally everything in between. We can grow strawberries, we can grow peanuts, we can grow cotton, we can grow forests, we can grow forages, corn, soybeans, you name it. We are blessed really here in the Commonwealth of Virginia with various soil types, but I'd like to hear more about the soil types in your area.
Well, Jeff, you might have heard that we have a few rocks up here in New England, and it is true. We have different kinds of soils. We have inceptisols, which are quite common. We have some in the northern parts of New England, some spodosols. Our soils do typically have a lot of rocks and are not particularly well developed, and they really present some struggles for growing crops, not to mention the cooler climate. So some of the types of crops that you have the options of growing in your area, such as cotton and peanuts, those are just not options up here in the Northeast.
So is forestry a big thing there in New Hampshire?
Yep, forestry and forage crops, dairy, historically been a very large potato industry in Maine. When you get into Massachusetts and in some of the river valleys, we have much, much better soils. And in those regions, you'll see a lot of vegetable production and high value horticultural crops, and also corn production. What we don't have are those red soils that you have in the Southeast, the ultisols that result from weathering.
And Stuart, another one of the four principles that we focus on is energizing with diversity. And I think a lot of your research and work looks at, the importance of crop diversification, or at least, how that ties into microbial diversity. And just if you could talk to that a little bit.
Crop diversity is one way to increase the types of organic compounds that are going into the soil, and to increase the variety of habitats that are available in soil for microbial life and the proliferation of a healthy food web. And so when we think about crop diversity, it's not only serving benefits to breaking up insect and disease cycles, but it is also increasing the variety of substrates, food types that are going into the soil and supporting the food web, which can help support a more diverse and healthier food web. At the same time, you can think about the different niches that different types of crops occupy, and that can help improve nutrient cycling and the retention of nutrients over the course of a season.
And Dr. Grandy, I think there's a lot of interest in one of the other principles is like maximizing living roots throughout the year. And I think we're learning more and more about the microbiology and the interaction with roots. If you could speak to what you've been learning and researching.
We know that roots play an outsized role in the accumulation and retention of soil organic matter. The efficiency of conversion of root biomass to soil organic matter is higher than it is for above ground parts of the plant. And so when we think about building soil organic matter and improving processes like the formation of aggregates that are so important for water flow and soil organic matter accumulation, roots are really critical. And when we first plowed our native ecosystems, one of the biggest changes in those ecosystems was the replacement of perennial root systems with annual root systems that were much smaller, less biomass, and fewer exudates. And we now know that plus disturbance was a huge factor in the loss of soil organic matter. We used to think it was primarily the tillage that was responsible for all of this carbon loss. But we now know, because of this really important role of roots, that the removal of those expansive root systems play a major role. And we've seen in our own work where we've used isotopic tracers of carbon that roots are converted to soil organic matter carbon at a much higher rate than above ground residues. And so when we think about building soil health, anything that we can do to get roots into the system and replace a bare fallow with a cover crop, even one that doesn't grow really high but is producing roots, is going to be hugely beneficial for the soil long term.
Dr. Grandy, you mentioned something a few minutes ago that really got my attention. You were talking about tools that we use to measure soil health, and I'd love to hear you talk a little bit at length about the difference we've seen in those tools over the past generation, from the 1960s, 1970s to here in 2024. How do those tools differ from then to now?
I think that there are labs now that are providing services that enable a glimpse of the life in the soil. And it might be a respiration test or a simple measure of microbial diversity or an assessment of the types of nematodes in the soil. But we're really just at the front end of that. And the new techniques that involve measuring microbial genomes, for example, are going to become, I think, quite widespread and enable an understanding of the microbial community that we have not had in the past. Along with the microbes and our ability to assess them, we also now have the capacity to monitor soil carbon and nitrogen in ways that we did not have readily in the past. Almost every lab has a combustion analyzer to assess total carbon and nitrogen, for example. So farmers can be monitoring how their management practices are influencing their total carbon and nitrogen contents over time.
I've heard it said that you can measure soil health from space with satellite images and other technology. Is that accurate?
There's an incredible potential in new satellite and digital technologies for assessing soil health. And I think as we move forward, it's going to be an area where there's an explosion of new techniques and potential for broad scale assessment that's also rapid, using those types of methods and coupling them with new data analytics that are enabling an analysis of data across time and space in a way that was just not possible before. And so I think we really are in an incredibly exciting time, right, again, at the front end of these new biological methods that are going to open up a world to us in terms of understanding the below ground biology, as well as digital technologies and data analysis methods that are going to enable us to have site-specific understanding of soils in a way we never did before.
Dr. Grandy, it's exciting to hear, what could be on the horizon. I mean, if you could wave your magic wand, what do you see, I guess, happening in the next 20 years with our ability to really understand even more about what's under the soil?
I think that we, again, are seeing incredible advances in sensor technologies that are going to enable us to monitor the nutrients, the water, and the plant growth in a way that was just not possible before. At the same time, we're going to begin to open up the black box of the soil community and understand the relationships between who's there and their functions in a way that we did not before. And both of those advances are going to enable us to dial in specific management practices to specific sites and conditions to optimize productivity and reduce environmental impacts.
And Dr. Grandy, if you could speak to who has inspired you in the course of both your life and career thinking about soil health, but then just natural resource management and conservation?
I think as a scientist, I'm always inspired by talking with growers. I try and go to multiple large grower conferences every year because I have an opportunity to hear about their observations, the things that they're noticing on their farms, and things that may not be consistent with our current thinking about how the world works. And I find that exchange with growers to be incredibly inspiring. And hopefully it goes both ways, because I come away from those discussions always with new ideas and thinking about things in different ways, because they are on the ground observing things in ways that it's not possible for me to do. And so at the top of my list, I would put those interactions with growers in terms of inspiration and things that motivate me and keep me learning.
Well said. Our guest in this episode, Dr. Stuart Grandy with the University of New Hampshire, Department of Natural Resources and the Environment. Thank you, Dr. Grandy.
Thank you.
And Dr. Bendfeldt and Mary, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Grandy and Jeff and Mary.
Thank you all.
For the Soil, a conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org. If you have a specific question about soil health, contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a soil and water conservation district office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts, all rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishee.